I am super caffeinated and super excited to dive into this video. I'm going to be going over 10 of the lessons that I learned from writing a 5-book series. I just finished my first ever series. It's a 5-book paranormal thriller series. The 5th book is coming out in a week, and I learned a lot from doing this. And so I'm going to start by giving you just a little tiny bit of background about who I am and what my series is so you can better understand the context of what I'm going to talk about. Then I'm going to dive into the 10 lessons, like the biggest takeaways that I am taking away from writing these books. It's actually crazy that I'm here filming this right now. I can't believe that I've written 5 books in the series. It just does not feel real at all that it's over. But my name is Claire, I'm 25, and I'm an award-winning author. I published my debut novel when I was 16 and then went on to write the first book in the series I'm going to talk about, They Stay, in college. That book went on to win the grand prize at the Writer's Digest 2023 Self-Published Book Awards. And then I have also written all the other books in the series. There are 4 more. They're paranormal thrillers and follow a group of 4 teenagers who have to fight these evil ghosts that are invading their town, and this creepy necromancer who's like killing kids and bringing the ghosts of other kids back to life in their bodies, kind of like reanimating corpses and stuff. I started writing book 1 in college. Like, really, I wrote the first inception of it freshman year of college, but because I was in school full time and I didn't really know what this book was going to become, over the course of those 4 years, it kind of developed, and I had like a finished draft of it by the end of my senior year, and then I took that summer to kind of market it and also take a little bit of time just to decompress after graduating, and then I published it the fall after I graduated from college. Then went on to write book 2, and it came out 6 months after book 1, and then book 3 came out 9 months after book 2. Book 4 came out, I think, about 9 or 10 months after book 3, and then book 5 came out like a year and a couple of months after book 4. I really took my time with book 5 though, and that was on purpose. I just wanted to make sure I was super happy with the ending before putting it out there. My writing process has developed significantly from writing book 1 to writing book 5. I've learned a lot about myself as an artist. I've learned a lot about how my brain works, and I've really honed my process. I tend to lean more on the plotting side of things. I am a plotter. I'm not as hardcore of a plotter as I was when I first started writing They Stay, and that's because I'm more confident in my internal knowledge of story structure and am more confident in my ability to like figure things out and make things work as I'm working on a story. But I think that's all the context you need, so now I'm just gonna jump right into the lessons I learned. Some of these I learned the easy way, some of these I really learned the hard way. So this is my public service announcement to heed my warnings, and hopefully you don't have to make the same mistakes that I did. But I'm really proud of these books. Like, there are things that I would do differently going back, and there are obviously mistakes that I made, but as a whole body of work, I am extremely proud of them and love the way that they turned out. So lesson number 1, you don't need to know how everything's gonna fit together when you first start writing. You can piece it together along the way. I had no idea what the ending of the series was gonna be when I first started writing book 1. I knew it was going to be a series. I originally thought it was going to be a trilogy. I had a vague concept for what book 2 would look like and a vague concept for what book 3 would look like, and I kind of knew a little bit about what I thought the ending was going to be, but my initial thought of what the ending was going to be is vastly different from the ending that I ultimately chose for book 5. But it all ended up being fine. I figured out plots for each book as I was going, and was able to fit everything together in a way that really ended up working. And I even found myself foreshadowing future events in earlier books that I didn't even know were going to happen yet, which is super weird to me. I don't understand how I did that, but it happened on multiple occasions. I like to think of all the events of book 1 as almost being like a paint box. Like, when I'm writing book 1, I'm putting all of the paints in my paint box, and then I can use those paints when working on books 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. It was kind of amazing how everything came together. Like, I did things in book 2 and in book 3 that were just major off-the-rails plot twists that I had no idea how I was going to reconcile down the road. I was like, ooh, what, like, this would be a really dramatic thing to have happen in the scene, or I'd be writing and I'd be like, ooh, what if she just did this? And like, oh no, that would be like way too crazy. And I'm like, you know what? It's going to shock the reader. I'm just going to have her do it. And then I have to reconcile it later on in the series. And some of those impulsive moments, like I had a character in book 2 just randomly decide to sell his soul to this like creepy old circus woman, and that ended up being a really important plot point in book 4 and was a catalyst to a lot of the action in book 4. and was able to turn into this really awesome dramatic element for book 4. And I had no idea what I was doing with that when it first happened. It really only happens in like one scene in book 2, but it ended up being this really, really big thing later, and it was able to be reconciled in this really cool dramatic way, and I was really glad that I put that in book 2. So just because you don't know where everything is going yet doesn't mean you are writing yourself into a corner. I was really scared of writing myself into a corner every single time I would do something like that, but what I learned is that I, first of all, never ended up doing that, and there was always a really creative way to work with the plot point that I'd created and leverage that to make the plot more dramatic and interesting. Like, it never put me in a position where I could not recover from it. It only put me in a position where it challenged me to think of creative ways to reconcile it, and that always made the book stronger and better. Lesson number 2, listen to your internal voice. This book has to feel right to you. If you're a writer or if you're an artist of any kind, I bet you have some sort of internal compass. Like, I have this feeling inside my chest or in my stomach or wherever. It's like a physical feeling when I'm writing something and it's just not right to me. I know it's not right. I cannot for the life of me articulate why, but I just have that feeling that something is wrong. Listen to that voice, because that is a great tip-off for when something actually is not working in your manuscript. I had that feeling hard before I sent my draft of book 5 off to beta readers. I knew that something wasn't right with the book. I just had this weird feeling. I didn't know what it was. And then I sent it off to beta readers, and as soon as I got their comments, a lot of what was said really, really confirmed what had been making me feel uneasy about the project. And I essentially ended up scrapping at least half of it and doing a bunch of other subplots over from scratch. You will know when things are working in your manuscript. And it can be very frustrating because I have this feeling a lot, and I have to be careful because it has taken me some time to differentiate that feeling from just me being a perfectionist and not allowing my work to go through like ugly duckling phases before I've figured out what the story needs to be. So it's like you need to be able to differentiate what that feeling is versus like your perfectionism or something like that. But try to pay attention to that voice. And if you start getting that feeling that like makes a scene really hard to write, just pause and don't waste your time and try to figure out why the scene isn't working for you, and then chip away at it until you until it has you feeling better. Usually when I get that feeling, I go back to the drawing board and try to figure out what my least favorite parts of the scene are, and then move things around until I start to feel a little better about it. I had a subplot, the romantic subplot in book 5 of my series, like for my main couple, was just not working for months, and I couldn't figure out why. And like all of their conversations, like they were okay, but they weren't giving me the romantic feeling. Like when I was reading them, like it didn't do anything for me. And so I couldn't figure out why that was for the longest time. And then it took me making a fundamental change in one of the characters' character arcs, because I got a feedback from one of my beta readers saying that the character just like didn't do anything in the whole book. Like he was just really stagnant and he wasn't going through anything and he didn't change. And he's honestly my favorite character in the series. And I'm like, well, that's not going to work for me. He has to be changing and he has to grow and he has to complete his character arc. And so obviously that wasn't working in the draft that I sent to beta readers. And so I really dug into his character and figured out how he was going to grow. And then as soon as I did that, the relationship fell into place because I created a completely different dynamic in their relationship, and then all of their conversations just jumped out of the page at me, and then everything became really, really clear. But if I had just said, it's good enough, and then not really dug into it, then I'd still have that feeling. I'd probably cringe whenever I thought about the book and just really not want to have anything to do with it. Lesson number 3, the better you know your characters when writing book 1, the better. Especially your antagonist. Your antagonist is the most important character you have in your book, and that should be the character that you focus on the most. Your main characters are also super important. I did not know my main characters nearly well enough when I wrote book 1, and I really started to get to know them when I was writing book 2 and book 3. And by book 3, they really, really clicked into place for me. And some of the dialogue in my original copy of book 1 did not really sound like these really clarified versions of the characters. I took the time to build out the characters, but I didn't really have a good understanding of voice yet, and I couldn't hear the characters speaking when I wrote my first drafts of book 1. I've since rewritten book 1 a couple of times, and so all the characters now are really consistent over the course of the series, but I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to understand who your characters are, how they sound, and what they want, because you want to make sure that your characters not only grow and change over every single individual book in the series, but also grow and change fundamentally from the beginning of book 1 to the end of the final book. And then all their voices will be more consistent, and just all around it will be a much smoother process. So even if you're a pantser, I highly recommend taking a lot of time, like even if it's in between draft 1 and draft 2 of the manuscript, sitting with your characters for a long time, making sure you nail their voices and like you can hear them talking to you like imaginary friends. And your villain has to have a very clear understanding of why they're doing what they're doing and why they're doing it right then, like why your story is starting then. I have a really complex villain in my story. He's the villain for the first 4 books, and then in the 5th book there's a slightly different antagonistic force, but he really was the main driver for those first 4 books, and he was doing different things in every single book and wanted slightly different things in every book, but he was just so nuanced that he could carry that much story. So yeah, know your characters and know your antagonist. Lesson number 4 is do not shortchange your process or skip steps. Literally every single time I tried to do this while writing the series, it ended poorly for me. If I skipped steps to save time, if I set a release day deadline and didn't have time for a certain step and then skipped it for that reason, it always came back to bite me in the butt. And this was especially true when writing book 4, because when I was writing book 4 is the longest book in the series. It is too long. I had never written a series before, and I know had it in my head that, and because it's true, that a lot of later books in the series, like in a series, when you're reading a series, the later books in the series are often longer than the opening books in the series. So I was like, oh, it's fine, it's normal, but I write thrillers, and so I find that it is hard to really sustain tension over 157,000 words. What happened to me when I wrote that book is that I had so much that I wanted to say, and my process changed a little bit, and this is still the case now. This is just how I write. I write a lot longer than I did when I wrote books 1, 2, and 3. When I was drafting book 3, I was comfortably averaging around 2,500 words per chapter when I was drafting, but I cannot for the life of me write a chapter that short anymore when I'm drafting. All of my drafting chapters are comfortably around 4,000 words, and then I cut them down to be between 2,500 words and 3,000 words while I'm editing the book. But I draft really, really long. And in book 4, I didn't cut out enough stuff from the chapters, so all my chapters are just a little bit longer, and that's why the book, I think, is a little longer. It's not as fast-paced. It's got some of my favorite scenes in the series. It's awesome, and it's got some really cool fast-paced sections of it, but there are some scenes, like when I was listening to the audiobook, I was like, oh, I probably should have narrative summaried that, or oh, I probably could have skipped that scene. And the reason that I didn't catch this before I published the book is because the draft was so long. I'd never written a book this long, and I set a release day like in the spring thinking that I was going to take around the same time to write it as I did book 3. I put myself in a position where I had an up-and-coming release day, and I did not have time to send the book off to beta readers, and I regret that to this day. That's probably my biggest regret of writing the series. I was confident, and I was like, I think I'll be fine without sending it to beta readers. I think I'm just going to skip and go right to ARC readers just because I don't have time. The book is so long, like by the time, I did not have an extra month in my schedule to accommodate for that. And beta readers would have been able to tell me that, and they would have been able to highlight the sections that dragged, and they would have been able to highlight sections that jumped out to them as like having problems in them. I would not have had to go through the stress of having my ARC team essentially act as my beta readers, because I essentially used my ARC reviews as like beta reader feedback and did a rewrite of the book like in the 2 weeks before publication, and that was a very stressful process. Like I cut down significantly the word count. It was like 180,000 words. It got down to 157. I probably could have cut more, but it was 2 weeks of stressful editing. There were like characters that had problems and character relationships that had issues and just stuff like that I cleaned up and made better before publishing it. But that was just a very messy way to do it. And then I have reviews that are still up on like Goodreads or whatever with the kind of rougher feedback on them. And so I don't love how I did that. And so now I will never put myself in that position again. And I was really careful not to do that with book 5. I will never, ever skip beta reading ever again. I will not set a release day for the book before I know how long the book is going to be. I want to have a completed draft 1 before I set a release day, just for my own sanity, and because that's what my fiance told me that I had to do in order not to put myself in that position and become very, very stressed. But this dovetails very nicely into my 5th lesson, which is don't think you're ever too good for beta reader feedback. I really thought that by book 4, I was like, oh, I've done this a couple times now. I know how to write a book. I know these characters. Like, I'm going to be fine. I'm sure that everything's going to be fine. I don't really need beta readers this time. I just don't have the time for it. I needed the beta readers. I really needed the beta readers for book 5. I will never ever publish a book without having it go through beta readers again, or just, send a book anywhere. It's so unbelievably helpful to have reader feedback that early on in the process. So you are never too good for beta readers. Even if you're like the best writer in the world, beta readers are still helpful and can still offer very constructive feedback when you're in the process of developing a manuscript. Lesson number 6. Your writing will evolve over the course of the series, and that is okay. I'm a fundamentally different writer now than I was when I wrote book 1 of the series. I would say that I'm a much sharper writer now than I was when I wrote book 1 of the series. I think that the prose in book 5 is a significant improvement over the prose in, I'll say book 2, because I just rewrote book 1 or parts of book 1 in the fall, but I haven't really messed with book 2 in a couple of years. So book 5, from a prose standpoint, is stronger than book 2, but that is just the natural progression of writers. It's been years since I wrote book 2 in 2022, so it's been 3 years, and I've learned new things, and I've changed and grown over the course of those 3 years, and so of course my writing's going to be a little bit different. But my general writing style is the same. It's always been very character driven. I've always just tried to get inside the characters' heads as closely as I can. I write in first person present tense, and so I really strive to get my writing to sound like the natural thought patterns of my point of view character. So it still works. It's just, prose has never really been my strong suit. I have never really liked writing prose. I find prose kind of annoying to write. Like, I love story construction, and I love the worlds that I'm creating and the stories that I'm creating. I love the characters. I love putting together plots, but I don't actually love writing the story. I like bringing the story to life, but the actual, I don't get a lot of joy out of just creating prose. So I've always really tried to write prose that blends as much into the background of whatever I'm writing as possible. I just want it to be a very simple mechanism for getting people into the story and for conveying all the things that I have in my head and for all the things that the characters have in their head about the story. I'm not a purple prose kind of gal. My prose has never ever been complicated. It's always been crazy simple, but I think that it does a better job now at being simple while not being quite so clunky. Like it was simple before, but now it's still simple, but I do a better job at weaving in description and making the transitions seem natural and just making everything flow together a little bit better instead of jump around a little more awkwardly sometimes. You want to make sure that your prose doesn't change so much by book 3 that it's unrecognizable from the prose of book 1, but if it evolves, that's a good thing, and it's actually something to be proud of if your last book is written better than your first book. Lesson number 7. Keep your characters changing all the time. There should not be a book where your characters do not change. Even if you're writing a romance subplot, I tried having book 5 just be my main 2 characters in a romance were just happy the whole book, and they were solving external problems, but their relationship was fine, and it was so boring. Your characters need to be developing and growing and changing and being dynamic over every single book. Otherwise, nobody's going to want to read it. Nobody wants to read about people doing nothing. If you don't have any conflict, you don't have any story. So make sure that not only you have a conflict for your main thrust of the plot, but all of your characters have something that they're grappling with, or some conflict they're going through, or some way that they're changing, or something that they have to overcome in every single book, and that all of those things add up to them changing fundamentally from book 1 to the final book. This is something I thought a lot about when writing book 5, because my main 2 characters in like the main romance in my series, Shiloh and Jonah, go through a lot of stuff in books 1 through 4. And so I was kind of like, when I started writing book 5, I was like, what if they're just like happy in book 5? Maybe they don't have to go through something really hard in book 5. Like, they've kind of been through enough hard stuff. But Jonah faded into the background. Their relationship was kind of boring. Like, there was just nothing going on at all. I was getting feedback that Jonah just seemed like Shiloh's sidekick boyfriend and like didn't actually contribute anything, which was a shame because he was a really cool character. And it got me thinking a lot about couples on TV, because I often find it to be the case that people and couples on TV cannot stay happy for very long either, which is annoying because like in Gilmore Girls, I honestly could have done with like Luke and Lorelai just being happy for all of season 5 and season 6 and season 7. Just have them be happy the whole time, and I still would have been like eating up every single episode. But it is often the case that romance novels end once the characters become happy, because once they're happy, a lot of people don't want to read about them anymore. I'm not saying that you have to have your characters break up, or like, you know, your every single romance in your stories break up every single book, because that would be kind of boring too. But just give them something that they're working on together. Even if they're happy, real life couples are always growing together and changing together. Real life people have baggage and stuff that they have to deal with, and communication problems and trust issues and all sorts of different things in their relationships. So give your fictional characters something like that, and then they can change from the beginning to the end, and their relationship can level up in some way. It doesn't necessarily have to mean that they're miserable all the time, but you do have to keep them changing and active in order to keep them interesting. The 8th lesson that I learned, and this is probably one of the biggest lessons that I am taking away from this experience, is that people read book 2, book 3, book 4, etc. in a series in order to replicate the experience they got from reading book 1. People pick up sequels because they had a good experience reading the first book. It's not necessarily because like you ended it on a crazy cliffhanger and they have to find out what happens. It's because book 1 delivered some sort of pleasurable experience to the person, and they want that experience again, and so that's why they're picking up book 2. So you want to make sure that your book 2 mirrors your book 1 enough to give your reader that experience again. If you're writing a mystery series, let's say, and in book 1 your characters go and solve a crime and they catch the serial killer and they put him in jail, and then in book 2 there's another serial killer and it's hunting them, and the serial killer ends up killing all their friends and then escaping, and they, let's say it's like a or like an unsolved murder, and they never catch the person. That would be a very different experience reading that compared to reading book 1. And so that reader is probably unlikely to pick up book 3 because it didn't replicate that initial good feeling that they got when starting the series. So you want to keep the subsequent books true to the reason that the readers fell in love with the series in the first place. And that, I think, is a really important thing to keep in mind. The 9th lesson is that all of the books need to fit into a broader plot structure. I like to think of every single book as having a story arc. So the story arc looks kind of like this. Like, it starts over here, and then as your story as time goes on, the conflict gets, like, the action rises, and then you have a climax, and then you have a resolution. So it kind of almost looks like that kind of arc. Each one of your individual books should follow this structure. Like, it should have a beginning, middle, and end. It should have like an inciting incident, a midpoint, a climax, and a resolution. But all of your books put together should also follow this arc. You should be able to put all of the little tiny arcs of each individual book on a larger arc. So there's like a larger arc that goes through all of your books. So like book 1, like in my 5 books, I have like book 1 is kind of like my beginning inciting incident of the conflict. My book 2 is my rising action. My book 3 is my midpoint, where like all of the action kind of shifts and becomes much darker. My book 4 is like kind of the tipping over into the climax. My book 5 is the climax of the whole series and also the resolution. Even though each one of these books has its own climax and inciting incident and all that stuff too, they all need to fit together into a larger narrative. And that was something that I did figure out before I started writing them. I didn't know necessarily what was going to happen, but I did know generally what was going to happen because I knew book 3 had to be the midpoint and I had to like do something game-changing in book 3. And I knew that in book 5, that had to be the biggest climax yet that encompassed the entire series. And so I really had to like bring it home for that one. And the 10th and last lesson that I will be talking about in this video today is that your readers will have different opinions than you will about your characters, your plot, and your story. And that is okay. That's normal, and that actually means that you're doing your job really well because you've created characters that are interesting and that are not perfect and that are flawed and that are real people that people can have different opinions on. If you try to create like a bunch of characters that are just like the perfect character, they're probably going to be super boring and not nuanced enough to carry a story. So readers should have varying opinions about who the characters are and like whether they're good and whether they're bad or whether, you know, they made a good decision about this or a bad decision about this. I am so attached to the main characters of the series, and I know they're not perfect, especially like my original main character. Like, she's very morally gray and she's not perfect, but she's driven so deeply by love for the people that she cares about that she will do morally gray things in order to protect the people that she loves. And there are a lot of different opinions about, some people absolutely hate her, some people really like her, some people feel bad for her, some people think that she shouldn't have been the main character, that other people, like other characters should have been the main character. Some people think that she should end up in jail for all the things that she did. It's just so interesting, and originally it made me feel like, oh, maybe I just wrote a really unlikable character. But I actually think that I wrote a really interesting character because people have such different opinions about her and have been having discussions about her. There's just enough material in all of these different dynamics to make people want to have opinions about them and to make people want to talk about them. And I find that really, really cool. So just because people's opinions differ from yours about your story doesn't mean that you did anything wrong. It actually means that you've written something that's interesting that people are wanting to talk about. And it's not my place as the author at all to get involved in these discussions. I mean, unless people like message me and then they're like, why did this character do this thing? They're awful. And then I can talk to them because that's kind of an open invitation to talk about my opinions about my characters too. But yeah, it's really cool. And it's cool to see your series take on a different life outside of yourself. Like, now the series exists in other people's minds and hearts in a way that's completely separate from me. So I don't know. I think that's really cool, but that is also something I had to learn, because just because people say that they don't like a character or have a different opinion doesn't mean that you did anything wrong. But yeah, those are 10 things that I learned from writing my 5-book series. There are definitely more. These are just 10 of the things that I came up with off the top of my head when sketching out ideas for this video. Did any of these resonate with you? If they did, I'd love to hear why in the comment section below. If you have a second, I'd be super grateful if you could hit that like button and also subscribe to my channel. As I mentioned at the beginning, my name is Fraise and I'm an award-winning author, and I make videos sharing actionable writing tips that helps me make my own writing better, along with like behind the scenes looks at my writing process and just general how-to videos about how I approach writing and different stages of my writing process. Subscribe if that sounds interesting to you. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you have a fantastic week, and as always, happy writing.